started actually with a personal request of mine. So a few of us in the office have been doing this thing called a 1-second video. So we have this app on our phone where we take a 1-second video of every day for 365 days. So I'd be so honored if you guys did something for me for my 1-second video today. Could I get everyone to stand up? I need to get my app ready. Alright, I'm going to point to one side of the room and I want you to chant globe, and this side of the room and I want you to chant med. So we're going to practice before I actually videotape it, alright? You guys should be used to this after Story Slam, so let's see it. Globe, med, globe, med, globe.
Come on, Loyola, you gotta bring it. This side's gotta bring it up. Like.
Alright. Thanks, everybody. I think that's an appropriate intro to an advocacy panel. Alright. So we kicked off this weekend with a really moving and inspiring panel about race. So we were talking a lot about systems of injustice, and we were really hoping that this panel could be a space where we talked a little bit more in depth about that justice piece. So that how piece, how we're really creating justice. And I know that at the GlobeMed office we've talked a lot about how advocacy really connects in with the GlobeMed model. And if you look at the top of our webpage, you'll actually see a few sentences that says, "We educate and train student advocates for global health equity. We build a movement of people who believe in health and justice for all." So we really throw around the word advocate in GlobeMed language, but I don't know if we've really fleshed out what it means to be an advocate in your chapters, and then specifically what it could look like to be an advocate post-GlobeMed. Not that there is a post-GlobeMed, but if there was. So GlobeMed is really invested in advocacy, and it's really invested in producing agents of change to support and build on this movement for global health equity. And we do this because we don't live in a world where all lives matter. And I don't even think we live in a country where all lives matter. And to end health inequality, we really need to address the social structures that impact the lives of the individuals and communities in our own backyard. We really need to stand up and speak up against systems of injustice. So whether we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, or whether we're putting together a campaign to support the returning Ebola healthcare workers, I really think that GlobeMed stands in solidarity and actively partners with causes and organizations that address the root of those problems. So that is why I am so happy and privileged today to introduce to you these three system disruptors, also known as panelists, who are all pushing for health equity, but in very different approaches and in very different ways. So first I'd like to introduce you to Gerald Guevara, who is a GlobeMed alum from Loyola. He now works at Mujeres Latinas en Acción as a youth program advocate, empowering men in a co-ed space to become active allies to prevent gender-based violence. We also have Reverend Lisa Marshall. She's a senior global grassroots associate at Results, which is an organization that harnesses the collective voice of grassroots advocates to push through policy and programs that work to end poverty both nationally and globally. And then also we have Amia Min, who's a former GlobeMed National Office member. And she is now the Executive Director of Article 25, a people's movement for the global right to health. So let's give them a round of applause. So this is the part where we have a conversation. So let's jump in with some questions. And Gerald, I'd like to start with you, and then Ami and Lisa, feel free to jump in. But could you start by telling us about what brought you to this work And when was the first moment when you really felt like you believed that you could impact change?
So wait, can you guys hear me pretty well? I don't know how close I need to be. Like, this is good, or should I go like really close? Closer? Okay. Pressure. Okay. So I have to say that, yeah, these questions are going to be really like fun and tough and complex, and I'm glad I'm going to be able to have the opportunity to be here with my panelists as well as with you all. So I want this to be able to be a dynamic, participatory, like kind of like where it's not just like us talking. But to answer your question, I think for myself, what brought me into this work, kind of by accident. So in particular, I found really my calling in life really in this idea that I think that men in particular need to be held accountable in bettering ourselves as allies in this idea or this movement in ending gender-based violence, particularly violence against women. So a lot of it, I guess I can take it back to my early days in high school. I think at the time, like, everybody can relate to this in some way or another. High school was like a confusing, dramatic time for a lot of people. And for myself, I felt myself in this like limbo about who I was in particular as a man, what that meant. I don't think there really was a particular rite of passage, like, oh, I know from I'm now a boy to like a man in particular. But I knew that was like a very complex idea. But then I had an opportunity when I got into college, got involved with GLOMED actually. GLOMED was the one in particular that I really felt that I could really hone myself on understanding who I was in the context of the world that I live in. As there are certain things that like opened my eyes to understand the certain injustices that exist in the world. One of those things that issue that kind of sort of keeps me up at night is the countless acts of violence that happens in the world. In particular, that can be as local as like college campuses with sexual assault cases and whatnot. But GLOMED in particular, the reason why I say GLOMED is really be my clear answer to how I felt like I can really make some sort of impact, some change. There's a lot of power in being able to be part of a collective movement that even though like you feel like you're just by yourself, when you're in solidarity with like the people around you that share a sense of passion for something that really moves them, like this is wrong, that it was reassuring for me that, wow, this is like, I'm not alone, and that I guess would be my clear answer to why I felt like I could make some sort of change in the world. Yeah. Appreciate that, guys. And ladies.
I'm a little older than you all, so I say that so that you understand the date that I'm going to reference. Because I'm 41. So when I was 13, this was the mid-80s. When I was 13, I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom doing my homework. I would have been in 7th grade, and my mom walked in. She was on the staff of our church at the time, and she said, I need to talk to you about the associate pastor at our church. And because she was on staff and I had been growing up at this church, I knew everybody. And she said, I need to talk to you because Pastor Don has a disease called AIDS, and I want to know if you've ever heard of it. So this was 1987. If you know anything about the history of the disease, there was very little known in the public about even how, I thought you could catch it by like standing next to someone or shaking their hand. It was terrifying. And I said, yeah, I've heard of it because I learned about it in health class last year. And that began our family's journey with this terrifying sounding fatal disease. I was afraid that when my mom went to the hospital to stand by this man that she was going to catch it and die. We watched our faith community react in healthy ways and not so healthy ways, not standing in judgment of that. Everyone was terrified and nobody knew anything. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that sort of clicked on something in me. And I remember in high school going to his funeral, and as I moved through life and decided to be in ministry full-time, I found myself talking more and more about social justice and systems and who's on the margins and who's at the table and who's not. And I found myself talking about this thing called public policy that I was a speech communication major at a major, humanity. I went to Indiana University.
Woo! I knew.
There you go. And so I had government class in high school, and that was about it. And I had my graduate degree was in theology. It wasn't in public policy. But I knew that I felt compelled to do something and to say something where I was sitting and with the crowds that I was with. And so I'll never forget, I was years later, this was like 2003, I'm in my home office, and I hear about this thing called the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria that has been put on the planet to very intelligently and compassionately deal with this trio of diseases. And I thought, it's about time. But I thought, that's like over there, and that's got nothing to do with me, and I gotta still figure out how I'm gonna connect with this. And then I found this organization called Results that was standing up for support for something called the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And so as I walked along, I found out that this thing that had happened to me when I was really young, that little pilot light, that little switch on, had been burning all the time. And somehow, in putting one foot in front of the other, I had found my way into an organization that could help me support the end of the disease that had killed our friend. And I learned the intertwining of these diseases with poverty and with injustice and all of those things, how it was this big conversation. And that's how I meandered into this work, but I'm very grateful because it brings me into rooms like this to talk with people like you. So you never know where you're going to end up.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Actually, learning about the HIV/AIDS movement was probably one of the major reasons that got me into this work too. I was reading about history books and articles, but I remember in college I was a part of GLOMED. I remember learning about how people who were affected by HIV/AIDS, either themselves or their loved ones, they were completely ignored in the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the United States. Politicians didn't pay attention to them. HIV/AIDS was labeled as a gay disease. No one would talk about it. Our president wouldn't even mention it. And it wasn't until people with HIV/AIDS actually started to organize together and demand that their politicians listen that we started getting research into what exactly was HIV/AIDS. Like, they didn't have a name for it even then. What was the research needed? What kind of treatments did we have? Well, we didn't have any of those either. But they demanded that our politicians start to bring research and treatments to bear. And without that type of massive social movement unfolding, we would never even see policies like PEPFAR or the Global Fund that exists today. And so I remember learning about this, but not really seeing that visibly very much, like when I was in college. And 2 summits ago, I was sitting in your seats here and had no clue what to do. I was a junior, so everyone was asking me, like, what do you want to do with your life? And that's like the worst question to ask seniors. You should never ask that. So I was here, but I knew I was interested in social movements still and deeply believed in the right to health. But it wasn't until I started talking with other Summit alumni, or not Summit alumni, GLOMED alumni, and current GLOMEDers, and I started talking to them about my interest in social movements and organizing, and found that other people were feeling a similar gap in terms of having an outlet for the type of advocacy that they wanted to do, and take the work that they had done in GLOMED and just take it to another level by combining it with organizing. And so that summer, actually, I spent a summer in Boston actually doing research the whole summer on what types of organizing exists right now for social issues. We talked to everyone from labor rights organizers to environmental health, climate change organizers, and we did that for months, to get a good sense of what types of advocacy exists right now for social issues, but I still didn't feel like I really understood what advocacy meant, like how a movement, a social movement really worked. And so somehow later in the summer, I ended up in Mexico City. I had a grant for my anthropology thesis where I was trying to connect with women's health advocates in Mexico who had basically won legislation in Mexico City, won legislation protecting abortion rights, and Mexico is an 85% Catholic country. And so, this was a really, really effective and powerful model for using organizing to create policy change. And so I went to Mexico. I didn't really have any connections, so I just took a street map and I literally just showed up at different organizations' doors, knocked on their doors, and eventually at some point they were forced to kind of speak with me. And I just did kind of interviews with different different women's health advocacy organizations that had been part of this campaign to change abortion rights legislation. And as I went to these different organizations and did interviews, I was able to see how they use different organizing strategies to mobilize different types of population around the same common cause. I went and I visited nuns who were basically using religious discourse and different takes on religious arguments to basically mobilize other nuns to actually become advocates for abortion legislation. I saw how they would go into schools in Mexico City and talk to urban youth about this issue and use different social media strategies to really connect with young people. They would work with indigenous populations and go door to door with like pamphlets because they didn't have access to technology really. They also they had specific organizations as part of their coalition that were dedicated to legal advocacy, where they would do case finding, search the newspapers for women who had abortions and were prosecuted for it in jail, and really saw how this was a really highly organized operation. And I think it wasn't until I was there and had saw all these organizations that I kind of really understood how movements are so highly organized and what it means to really do the kind of advocacy that produces a social movement. But that was still like half of the barrier that was kind of preventing me from being an advocate. The other type was, the other barrier was I just had a stereotype of what an advocate looked like. And I think a lot of the common models of organizing, like Saul Alinsky kind of styles, were more like, I don't know, kind of like a macho man coming into a room and like everybody looks to him as like a leader and he gets people riled up and he's the one that kind of makes the decisions, It's really
relate to that. That's so me.
Yeah, exactly. That's not me at all. Very, they're great public speakers. It just wasn't. I could not see myself doing that. And so it wasn't until I was in Mexico and as I was visiting all these organizations, I never once saw that stereotype. I saw people who were, they were just like a lot of them were just young people who cared about this issue and didn't know what they needed to do to get this legislation passed, but found organizing as a tool to do that. There were older women working alongside also young men like Gerald who really understood their masculinity and really terrible stereotypes of masculinity as part of a system of patriarchy and wanted to challenge the current legislation for abortion. And so after I was in Mexico, I kind of more so understood that anyone can really be an advocate, and more so than that, everyone needs to be an advocate. And so I think really understanding what advocacy looked like and then understanding that second part was really what brought me to this work.
A quick disclaimer for everyone in the audience. The path is not very straightforward. Let me just be very clear about that. I know as we share our stories here, I think sometimes we can get the impression that, they just clicked. There are a lot of detours and twists and turns. Sometimes you need to literally go halfway across the world to figure yourself out. Sometimes you don't. And I want to just for everyone in the audience, I know that's a common feeling that I know as a past summit participant myself. It's a confusing and you're lost, and then I know something like that. I remember one of the common questions I was debating was should I go to med school? Should I not? And so that sense of feeling that you're lost is completely okay. I think that's important to acknowledge that. I know that as panelists, we may seem like it was just, I knew exactly what I wanted. No, there's a lot of ups and downs that comes with the journey to get where we are today. In the same way that the journey that you all to get here now is something that I know that had lots of twists and turns. I think some of you are coming from like really far out. I know we have some people from Uganda coming out here, but people across the country. And so like that's something that I want to be acknowledged first.
So I think Emmy got us off to a really good start, but I'd love to hear from Gerald and Lisa as well. In the context of your work, how do you define what it is to be an advocate, and how are you interacting with systems of power?
I want to start with a question. Now, this is not an embarrassment question, and either any answer that you have is absolutely fine. But if you'll indulge me, I want you to stand, if you know the names of the 2 senators and the representative who work for you in Congress. If you know the names of your 2 senators and your representative, all 3, who work for you in Congress. John Schaefer, I see you back there, you're cheating. He knows. Okay.
His laptop's open.
With his laptop. Oh, he's Googling it. He's totally Googling it.
Somebody got your laptop, you can't do that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for those of you standing, and bravo. Okay, you may have a seat. Now, I want you to notice, I mean, those folks are fabulous. John Schaefer Googling in the back. But those folks are fabulous, but the reason I bring that up is I want you to see how common it is not to know, right? Because there are often times that folks will come and want to advocate with us, and they will say, I'm not your person because I don't know the names of my senators and my rep. That doesn't knock you out. That just makes you typical. So let's just start there and figure out, that's just normal. That's fine. A lot of times we don't talk about the civic engagement stuff past government class, right? And we get more specialized in what we're studying. And American culture doesn't seem to encourage us to get involved in really positive ways. Doesn't really paint a picture that it's something we want to do. The way that, in a nutshell, the way that we advocate, the piece of all of this that results is about is changing federal level policy. There are certain decisions that are made pretty exclusively on a congressional level or on an administrative level. By that I mean like presidential administration kind of level, that affect extreme poverty both in the United States and globally. The decisions are made every year. They're not only about what is spent and how much is spent, but like how smartly it's spent and how compassionately it's spent. That's the stuff that we advocate on. And so we learn the names of our senators and our rep, and we figure out what are the smart, compassionate things to be asking for, what's going to save the most lives the fastest. And we look at a particular portfolio of legislation because poverty is obviously way too complicated and broad. You've got to take a piece of it, right? And we look at education, economic opportunity, and health, and we look at really fundamental stuff that we need to be investing in that's going to help people have self-sufficient lives of dignity and a quality of life and that sort of thing. So I recommend to you at some point borrow John Schaefer's laptop and Google and figure out who your senators and your member. Because remember, those 3 people work for you. Those 3 people work for you.
That's awesome. I guess my answer to the question, I guess what it means to be an advocate, in the context of my work as a youth program advocate, youth organizing and grassroots organizing in particular. So Mujeres Latinas en Acción is based here in Chicago in the Pilsen neighborhood, and we predominantly serve the Lower West Side and the South Side of Chicago. The neighborhoods in particular are Pilsen, Little Village, Back of the Yards, and Lawndale. Majority of those, for those that know the Chicago region pretty well, that's predominantly the Latino community of Chicago. So I find myself working predominantly in Black and Brown communities, which in a lot of systematic ways are marginalized. But in the context of in the immediacy of me working directly with youth as a direct service provider, is that when it comes to the idea of being an advocate, one aspect of an advocate for me is getting the opportunity day in, day out to be the person that I wish I had when I was younger. like I referenced like earlier, high school is a confusing time. I predominantly work with high school students ages 13 to as old as 20, because I do work with our alumni who are graduating and are attending college for the first time, for the first time ever. And so I think we can all think about a time, right, where we wish we had somebody there for us, right? Just kind of like guide us and figure stuff out, because it's a, you know, like that's always an ongoing thing. It's not just like in the context of just high school. And so for myself, it's very clearly just being like an advocate, meaning for me, being the person I wish I could have had when I was younger. But also tied to that, it's also the opportunity to just build relationships. I think advocacy is exactly that, building relationships. Because when you're building relationships, there's a window for all of us, myself included, and you all, to listen. Listening is a very important aspect. I think that in thinking about, in my work in particular, working with marginalized communities and Black and Brown communities, particularly for the Latino community, is that listening. Because tied in the local context of my work, right, and I think that's the reason why we're all here representing local, national, and international, is that here in Chicago, I don't know if anyone is following Chicago politics pretty well, but there is a particular mayoral runoff between Rahm Emanuel and Jesus Chuy Garcia. And like, this is not like, I'm not trying to make a pitch like, you all should go vote for so-and-so. It's not that. But I want to bring to light the difficulty and the challenges that come with mobilizing the Black and Brown communities, in particular, how, one, when it comes to advocacy, when I say listening, that's when you can be able to highlight particular issues that are most relevant to the people that you're trying to work together with. I know that when it comes to the families and the teams that I work with, and like just recently, so with the Rahm Emanuel and Chuy runoff, it's a runoff election. So meaning that February 24th was a first like official like election, and statistically of all the Chicago eligible voters, 67% of Chicagoans that are eligible to vote did not go to the polls, which is a shocking number. To think that that there's a lot at stake, and that only like 23%, 23% like showed up to the polls. I even had like an elderly woman comment to me when I ended up going to the polls, like, wow, you're relatively young, how old are you? I was like, yeah, this is important to me. But I say that because I think that sheds light on the fact that there are particular reasons why I think some people don't go out to vote, because there's a sense of worthlessness that my vote doesn't matter, or it's not just the voting part, but my voice doesn't matter, right? And then with that, like the sense of worthlessness, that tied together with that, it's hopeless. Like nothing's gonna change. And then already, right, by like I think there's an amazing whoever put the post-it note like silence perpetuates the status quo, like, and I really want to acknowledge that. And so when I tie that together with the work that I do with youth, I don't know if anyone had known, but the governor for Illinois had cut $300 million worth of funding for youth services in particular, and that directly impacts the youth that I work with. And it was important for me to share that news to youth and to give them that shock and awe. Like apparently they're our representatives, right? And I'll be honest, I know there was a time that I didn't know who my Congress representatives were or the senators, and had them realize thinking apparently you all don't matter. I've told this to my youth. There are people in leadership positions that think that you don't matter. And for one aspect about working with youth that excites me is that youth are an extension. They're sort of for me a lens to the grander context of much larger things at stake. One youth, in particular, as extensions of their family, give me insight into the difficult challenge, the different challenges that each of their families face. I can tell you almost half of my students at one point or another have attempted to cross the border multiple times. When I speak of the border, I mean the United States and Mexican border. All of my students come from Mexico, and again, this is a lot to unpack, but one of the things that strikes me is that, in all the sacrifices that their families have made to travel here, is like how do we mobilize, like particularly in my work, mobilize youth to be advocates for their own families. Think about, I don't know for anyone those are coming from immigrant families, has anyone ever translated for their parents? Anyone in the audience? All the time for those, yeah. And I want to acknowledge that because that is a very, I know some of you may have been like translating for your parents as young as like 6, 7 years old. I literally work with youth that they, as early as they can remember when they started learning English, that they were translating for their families at 8 years old, 7 years old. Can you imagine going to, right, you're going to just try to attempt to get papers? Even I was just with one of my youth and his mother, right, to just get his state ID and having to translate like at 8 years old. And if you're 8, like you're like honestly your job in life is just to just have fun, like not translating, like navigating the bureaucracy that is like apparently the U.S. government, right? So like, and that's one of the things that I want in the work that I do as an advocate. It's about being able to empower the people around me to become their own advocates. My goal is that I'm not going to change the lives of all of my students, but my hope is that I provide the tools to shape them to understand who their Congress representatives are and go out there and I ended up actually, just coincidentally, I ended up having all of our students like write letters to their senators and Congress representatives talking about why like youth services and after school matters or after school programs matter to them. Literally, like I asked the question like, where would you all be if you didn't like weren't here in an after school program? A lot of them said like, oh, I would be on the streets. Some like I would probably be on my way to prison, right? And I know they say that jokingly, but I know that's very real because in the work that I do, I also work with youth that face gang violence in their neighborhood. Like imagine just like having to be very concerned like the time of day, right, and what block you're walking on because there are very clear, vivid lines of where you should not and should not be walking. So again, like there's a lot there, but I hope that kind of gives a glimpse into the idea of an advocate that has a lot of different layers.
Yeah.
Sure the snaps by the way, guys. Like for real, like it's good.
I just want to say I'm really glad to be on a panel here with Lisa and Gerald because I think there's so many types of advocacy, whether you're voting, whether you're going to meet with your members of Congress, or whether you're staging a rally or a protest. And the most effective movements utilize all at the same time, but there are a lot of different ways you can start to get involved, start to use your voice, and so I think it's good to hear different types of work that we're doing. So how do you challenge systems of power? That's a really big question. But I guess we need really big questions if we want to tackle big problems. And so for Article 25, we kind of had a twofold approach in terms of how we understand we're trying to challenge a system of power. On the one hand, we want to make organizing skills really accessible to anyone, whether it's Chacha and Utena in Nairobi, or whether it's students here in the U.S. like you guys, and really create a set of organizing strategies and tactics that are really effective when you're mobilizing for the right to health. But but on the other hand, we also want to have an issue focus in terms of shifting a lot of these major structural barriers in global health. And we really ask ourselves, in the next 10 to 15 years, what are some things that we can actually really shift in terms of local, national, or global barriers to the right to health? What are things that are really threatening or undermining the work that we're even doing here today, even in GlobeMed? What's going to threaten that in the next 5 to 10 years, and what can we do to start to change or prevent those things? And so for us, that comes down to a certain set of issues, like patent laws, access to medicines, whether it's legislation in our own country or through multilateral trade agreements. Patent laws are one of the largest battlegrounds for the right to health right now. And then drug company lobbying is actually larger than any of the next 3 tobacco lobbying combined. It's almost insane how much money goes into making us think that even drug companies are trying to, protect the right to health, or that how much private sector collaboration is needed, which is true, but at the same time, they're also actively trying to prevent access to medicines right now and in the next 10 to 15 years, especially for poor people. A second major focus issue is unjust debt burdens on poor countries. I'm sure many of you have learned about structural adjustment, especially from the 70s, 80s, the rise of neoliberalism. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank have a lot of policies that literally force countries to scale back their health systems, that force them from putting money into public education, all of the social determinants of health. And so we're still facing, countries are still facing those same policies from decades ago, and we're still implementing those same policies and the loans that these multilateral organizations that give out today. A couple of the areas are new forms of financing for the right to health. Like, what if we had a global right to health fund that actually helped governments scale up universal health coverage, actually scale up horizontal programs instead of only vertical disease-specific funds like for HIV/AIDS or TB. Another thing. Sorry, I'll stop. But another thing is also legal frameworks. Like, what if we had a Kyoto Protocol for health that actually bound countries to a certain set of right to health norms? These sound like ridiculously big things to focus on, but we have to think at a systems level for our advocacy if we want to create systems level change.
Thanks for those answers. I thought they were really powerful and enlightening. One of the things that Gerald said, he was talking about empowering people to be their own advocates, which also makes me think that potentially a lot of us in this room and on this panel are working with communities that you're not necessarily a part of, that you're standing in alliance around issues that might not directly impact you the same way that they impact the direct stakeholders of what you're talking about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about ethically organizing to give voice to those that you aim to serve through your campaigns and projects.
I love this question because I get asked this in some form or fashion. I work at an agency called Mujeres Latinas en Acción. For those that don't know Spanish, that's Latin Women in Action. I happen to be one of 4 male staff out of a staff of a total of 60 women. It's like, oh my gosh, what? How did I end up there? And I happen to be the only male staff that is working directly with direct services. And the other 3 men in our staff are accounting and IT. So stereotypical. I know, I joke with them all the time, like, dang, you guys are stereotypical guys. But anyways, I know them very well. But I'm asked the question a lot, like, Gerald, like, why did you choose to work at Mujeres? And I know, and a lot of times, like, for my feminists in the room, that should be everybody in the room. I love this, like, these conversations because it challenged me, and I actually welcome, like, I've had it, like, the radical feminists is like, man, men are all terrible, and y'all, like, you don't know what, like, you don't know the struggle. And I don't, I'll be very real. At the end of the day, I'll tell you, I'll be very real with you all. I will never understand the human experience. I will never. As much as I can try, I will never understand the feeling where one big cat called down the street and I have to be worried. Like, I like dressing nice, I'm not gonna be wrong, but then I don't have to worry about like, ooh, like people just turn their heads. I'm more like flattered, like, thanks. But one, I understand to a certain extent like the discomfort that can be, right, if you're working at a certain time of the day, right, and you simply just want to get to a place and you're being bothered by a bunch of people with catcalling. Really, like when it comes to like being in the environment that I'm in, I always say first and foremost it is a very humbling and a huge honor to be working side by side with the women at Mujeres. Because in that sense, there's a lot for me to learn. I think for men in particular, there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do. And I think just kind of think about systems, like the really grand system that needs to be like highlighted is the whole patriarchy, right? I remember seeing, like, encountering that word, I'm like, what is the patriarchy? What is that? It's this complex thing, right? But for me, I can say very succinctly that it's important for myself being someone outside of, like, being a male-identified person, that in working in an organization that seeks to literally empower Latinas and their families, that my role is more so at first acknowledging, my male privilege. right? As much as like I jokingly like highlight, I've never understand the female experience. I have to acknowledge that there is a privilege that I can walk at any time during the day and feel relatively safe that I'm not going to be catcalled, right? That's just one example among many others. And then it's also important to listen. I think that's very key. Like I can't emphasize that enough. Like just listening. I've had the honor and privilege to have encountered and developed a really strong relationship with phenomenal women in my life that have helped me just like teach me like a few things that I didn't know, and then like to unlearn a lot of different things that like, I was socialized to believe in. And I bring that all together in one. My role isn't to work for women, right? It's to work with, and I need to emphasize underline the with part. My role, particularly as a male ally, is to hold other men accountable. That's where my role is. I particularly think that it's one, like, women have, like, one, shout out to the women, you all have been, like, paving the road way before men, like, ever, like, you know, caught on. Every revolution, really, women have played a predominantly strong role in it all, but it just doesn't get highlighted, right? Like, I want, like, that needs to be acknowledged, and the role of men is, like, sometimes, like, one will enter spaces and automatically, if you say something, it's, like, acknowledged, like, oh, nice, the guy said that, but it was just, like, previously said by a female in the room, right? And some of you, I get are like, oh yeah, I just said the same exact thing, and some other dude just took the credit for that. One, like, yes, there's like privilege that male voices are heard, but our role is to be able to highlight the people, that, particularly the women that have been paving the road long before men have been on board with this movement. Because like in the work that I do professionally, there's a lot of excitement that like we need to engage our young men and boys in the movement to end violence against women. Like in particular, I just said like the Office of Violence Against Women, in particular of the Department of Justice. We are informing them of, they were potentially giving us $750,000 to our organization to one particularly focus on working with like men in particular. And parents think this is an exciting thing, but one, I think it's very symbolic that it's coming from an organization, Mujeres Latinas en Acción. Everyone in this room, like for the men in particular, like, we would not be here, like literally in the world if it weren't for women. Like, literally, like your mom, like seriously. Like, but everyone is here, like yeah, we can pay tribute to like the women in our lives. And so I say all this in that my hope is that again building that solidarity. I have a huge problem with, and as much as I'm flattered, right, that everyone acknowledges, particularly the organization I work in, that it's flattering that like generally you're doing some great work with like re-educating young boys and men who want to understand our male privilege. But I have a huge problem with the fact that I'm put on this quote unquote pedestal as like the exception. Like oh you're doing as the exception. The fact that I am an exception is a problem. That's something that needs to be said. Like thank you. No, I'm kidding. I feel like I'm exploding words like it's the best. Anyways, side tangent. But that needs to be said out loud and to be acknowledged because the fact that I am an exception is a huge problem. And I'm only working particularly in the context of this here locally, but one just imagine it in different contexts like throughout the world where we see gender-based violence and from the far extreme, right, to the minimal, like whatever that may look like. But that's a thing for me very important to acknowledge that.
I actually have a quick follow-up question for you. So, I mean, people have asked, why are you in this organization? Why are you doing this work? And have you ever had it articulated to you, like gratitude, or someone that says, you bring a particularly unique, positive thing because someone frames it differently and they see it as another positive. Or do you feel that people, they just articulate to you these questions of why you would engage in this work, or,
Yeah. So, no, Lisa, actually, I do get those moments of gratitude, and I appreciate it. Those are always motivating. I particularly get that from the mothers of the youth that I work with, the young men I work with. There's another aspect of Mujeres Latinas en Acción. We do work, a lot of our clientele, one of our core departments is our sexual assault and domestic violence department that does phenomenal work in intervening in moments of crisis. And they refer their children one to our youth services. So let me give you a context. 80% of our youth, statistically speaking, have been exposed to some form of violence or trauma in their life, and particularly in the form of sexual assault or domestic violence at home. And a lot of those perpetrators are male. And when brought into, like, we just recently, like, one created a co-ed program, like, recently, as of last year. And there's a reason why I was brought on board. But when mothers in particular take the time and, like, they show their gratitude, because for them it's when one, like, in the counseling that they you know, I guess, like, let me start. One, to be able to, one, see that there is a male ally that's, like, doing good work and modeling for their sons, like, values that are integral to supporting women and girls everywhere is really, like, really reassuring. I've had, like, just to tell you a particular story. I've had like mothers come up to me and they would cry because they thank Mujeres on one level for, one, getting them out of that crisis situation with, like, their partner, and these are the cases of domestic violence, where, you know, one, to be able to be out of that situation, and now to, like, because there's a lot that youth in particular, like, are coping with, like, oh my God, if it's a bit to a point where it's normalized for youth that, like, violence is normal, if that's an expression of love, like, and I kid you not, there are some youth that I've worked with, like, that's what they thought is, like, a good relationship. Like, one hitting your partner is one just, like, one, like, killing the fight, like, so that there's no conflict, right? And me having to unpack that is heavy. Like, don't get me wrong, not overnight do I, like, change, like, the boys to just, like, have a clear sense of who they are. But when moms do come up to me, that means a lot. It means a lot, and I do get the gratitude, and that helps motivate me to at least continue with the work that I do.
Yeah, I just want to, Joe did a really great job of talking about how ethically organizing really starts with really understanding and checking your own, power and privilege as an individual in a room with other individuals. And I just wanted to ask, how many of you have had a conversation in your chapter about, like, group practices or rules for having a safe space? That's pretty awesome, actually. So much props to all of you. That's really the foundation if you want to talk about anti-oppression or having an ethical space for whether you're organizing or advocacy or any type of work together. And that, those values that you set together, a group, are the foundation for all the work that you do after that, whether it's in your chapter or with your partner. But I kind of wanted to talk about ethical organizing in more of a structural sense as an organization. I think it's easier to talk about listening or making sure people's voices are represented more in a theoretical sense than in a concrete sense. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about the global vote that we just finished for Article 25. Organizing is core to our model, and organizing means to build power. So how we organize really defines what kind of power we're building and what kind of identity that we have as a movement. And so recently we just finished a global vote where we really opened up the decision on which of those issues that I talked about earlier, which of those issues we would really fight for in the next year. We opened that up to all the people that have been involved in Article 25 or haven't been yet. And so anyone could really vote on what our movement's priorities were for the coming year. But our goal was really to enable people most affected by health inequities to actually have decision-making power in the priorities of this movement. And so we literally, provide some funds to our grassroots partners all across the globe. Some FlowMed partners in Kenya and Uganda. They literally printed out vote ballot sheets and went door to door. For a lot of people, this is the first time they did something like canvassing, in their neighborhood, and really went door to door explaining these issues that were on the ballot, which most people have never talked about or heard about before, and then had people vote on which campaign they wanted us to focus on for this year. And this is an example of really turning the decisions that you're making, whether you're for an organization or whether you're even a chapter, and turning those decisions into an opportunity for mobilizing and for shifting power to people, like to the people whose voices you're trying to represent. I think it's not really a side thought, though. It kind of is right now, especially within the global health field. Most organizations have a set hierarchy, and so I think really trying to challenge the very structures that you have as a chapter and how you make decisions and how you do that when you're setting your partnership action framework. I don't know if that's the right term anymore, with your partner. You can really use this as an opportunity to change how you make those decisions on strategy, and it really shouldn't be a side thought. I think it's an imperative that we do this as an organization and as a movement, and if we don't, then we're actually replicating a lot of the power structures that we're trying to change in the first place. And so you really have to not only engage in deep conversations with your partners, but also make sure you're opening up your ideas to dissent. And at the end of the day, you still have to make a decision on a certain set of things, but how you make those decisions is just as important as the decision itself.
I would say, well, I really appreciated what Emmy and Gerald have said about that tension between wanting to be a part of solutions simply because you're human, and bringing the unique strengths that you have to the work, but also being sensitive to power structures and what it means to work in solidarity and the complexity of all that. I mean, just briefly with results, we're actively trying to get better at this. There are a couple layers to what we do. My immediate audience of folks that I work with are constituents, everyday people, voters, stakeholders in the United States. And so there is that automatic buy-in that if you're a part of the United States, then you have a stake and an automatic buy-in to what Congress does. So in that way, I'm a part of that community. We are a part of that community. But we know that what we're advocating for, my travels have only taken me to Europe. I mean, I haven't even gone on vacation. When I go on vacation, I'm like a broken record. I'll go back to Ireland and England, and I'm really dull that way. And it's so just a sense. I'm acutely aware of my own personal lack of experiences, and I came up in just a middle income, everyday, just a normal childhood, solid start in the middle of Indiana. So I can't even empathize with some of the struggles here in the United States, and I have some struggles around that too. How do I act with integrity? And yet, because as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I come to this work because of my faith beliefs. I believe everyone is my neighbor, and how do I act neighborly? In those ways that I have power, then I try to speak truth to power and say, you know what? We're spending money. We say that we're spending a piece of our kitchen table household America budget to save lives. Is that what we're really doing with our money? And are we supporting ways of getting to solutions that are dignified, that are compassionate, that take into account the integrity and the involvement and there's a sense of being with people and not just indiscriminately throwing money at people. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about supporting programs that harness the smarts, the resources of countries that are trying to move out of situations, and we're putting in the resources that we can and the smarts that we have, and it's an all-in together kind of thing. That's what it feels like when we work on our global issues, and then of course it does hit closer to home when I think about the struggles of people in my state, in the heartland, in the Midwest, in my country, these are my neighbors, who are figuring out, do I pay for medicine or do I pay for food? And these are American citizens. So It is a tension that we're continually trying to live into and make sure that there is room and space at the advocacy table for all voices. I mean, let's face it, to have time to speak to your senators and reps, that's a luxury of time that I have that not everybody has because I'm not working 3 jobs. So how do we bring those voices into the room in a way that has real integrity and real authenticity, whether it's a voice from a different country or it's a voice from within the United States. So we're continuing to live into that, but trying to be as sensitive to that as we can.
Thank you all for that. So we're about to move into the Q&A time. So in the audience, you guys can start thinking of your questions. But there's one more question that I want to ask our panelists, and since we're so close to our ending time, if you can challenge yourselves to tell it in 60 seconds or less.
You got it.
So our last question is really around the fact that this work can be a really long journey. It can be exhausting and it can be frustrating. And so I would like you to tell us about a time when you had doubts or encountered criticism about the work you were doing, and like what questions you think you would like to leave with our students and what they should be thinking about as they move forward in this movement.
I have doubts about my effectiveness every single day, and yet I know that there are voices speaking about priorities on this planet every day, and if I don't take my turn, I'm letting some other priorities take my turn for me. So taking my turn is critically important. You have to think of advocacy, at least public policy advocacy, as a marathon and not a sprint. And one of our former executive directors, she said, you know, this kind of work, we have to keep each other inspired and let each other know that we are making a difference, even if we don't see the fruits of our labor quite yet. It's like digging in the dirt, you know, planting a garden. Dirt work, you know, digging, and then all of a sudden there's this miracle. The miracle didn't come out of thin air. It came from all the dirt work that came before. So you may feel that you're not making a difference, but that's not fact. So just keep at it.
Actually, to piggyback of Lisa's point, I take great pride in the fact that like the whole dirt aspect. I love the term "in the trenches," right? I'm in the trenches of the nitty gritty, and it's not all like flowers and rainbows every single day where I'm making like changing the lives of all of my students or whatnot, or systematically changing the patriarchy. But I can say this: it is exhausting. It is exhausting work, and when you all segue from that transition from your undergrad or just away from school and professionally, there is a very delicate balance of being able to, one, understand that where your capacity is at any given time, right? Because I know that the passion is something that like drives each and every one of you in some form or another, right? To do the work that you do in GlobeMed, but not just in GlobeMed, but just like the things, the issues that drive you every single day that you want to address. But it does get exhausting. So take the time to understand the importance of self-care. I want to say that self-care is super important. If your thing is like at home, like after a long day of like, I don't know, studying for or work, right? And you go home and you watch YouTube videos of puppies that makes your day, to get yourself back into like the trenches again, do that. Everybody has their thing. Like puppies, I actually don't mind. Like I have a puppy too, so I love dogs. But I also want to say this. I don't have a question to pose for you all. It's more of a statement. One, I love the idea of being radical in the sense that don't apologize for the acts that you all are doing every single day for the work that you do. Don't apologize. And there's there's a need for it to be humble, right? But there are some that are gonna criticize you like you're not changing anything, right? Well, you know where you stand. Like be able to understand where you stand in the things that drive you, and don't apologize and continue doing that. I think that and when we think about social movements, like I think about it in the context of revolution, not in the violent sense, but in the internal revolution for yourself, that you know what you're set for, and your sense of values, and that gives you the energy to wake up every single day to do the work that you do. Then everybody else, the idea is like the masses will pick up on, like everybody else will follow you, All right, so don't apologize to do what you all do.
Yeah, just to follow up on Jill's point really quick, a friend who's an organizer was telling me recently that women are so much more likely to apologize for their opinions, especially when it's seen as disruptive around them. And she was telling me that I say I'm sorry a lot in conversations too. And she said every time you say I'm sorry around me, you have to say I'm sexy instead. So if you're working on trying to work on that, it's a good stuff. We've had a lot of people since starting, Article 25 tell us that what we're trying to do is actually silly or that it doesn't matter. We've had people, especially who have MDs or JDs, tell us that organizing doesn't matter. And not that there's anything wrong with getting a degree, but there's definitely a big culture of inaction in this field. And so I think, as you're starting to take actions and figure out what's the best way to advocate for change, you really need to ask yourself every day, why am I here? That will really be your compass whenever you're frustrated or have doubts. I'm going to borrow from the racial justice panel, and someone said, find your song. And I think that is just a really good way of putting it, find what makes you, wake up every day and your values, because those will really navigate you through, an ocean of haters. Another thing is, I think sometimes when you have big visions, you more often to face big and frustrating problems. It's just the nature of having a big vision in the first place. And so whenever you're feeling frustrated by just the scale of what you're trying to do and not seeing the day-to-day connect, just really go back to what you can do today to really change first, what's frustrating you, or start to change that. And it might be small things, but at the end of the day, if you start going about it on a day-to-day basis, you can eventually start to create a larger vision. And the last thing is just self-care. Again, like Gerald said, it's so important to take care of yourself and build a community around you that really cultivates the same shared values of anti-oppression, and really looks out for your own mental health and well-being too, especially as you start to get into advocacy. I know every Sunday I love to read The New Yorker. I read every single movie review at the beginning of the New Yorker, which is a really stupid waste of time, but I just think they're such beautiful summaries. So capturing a movie, I don't know, it's kind of my self-care thing.
No judgment. I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Awesome. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists?